Have you ever stopped to think that those times you really push yourself, those aha moments, those flashes of insight, what if they're not just random? Like, what if they're all connected to something much, much bigger?
It's a really intriguing idea, isn't it? And that's exactly the kind of heady stuff we're going to explore in this deep dive.
We're taking a look at pages 318 through 328 from a text all about a Shrotist.
And this section really digs into the connections between your own consciousness, the world around you, and, maybe even hints at a bigger spiritual reality, tying it all together.
So we're going to unpack all of that, see how these pages can help us understand our personal growth, that back and forth between intuition and reason, and even that feeling of pushing past our limits. So
Yeah.
let's get started. Page 318 jumps right in with this big idea from Hegel.
Yeah. Hegel was all about this idea that doing and striving is like our core purpose as individuals. Like
Right.
by actually using our abilities and putting in the effort, we're bringing life to what was, just potential before.
And right after that, the text mentions this great schism in the individual spirit.
Exactly. It talks about how this schism, this kind of split, is what creates duality or binarity, as the text calls it, within the monad. And think of the monad as the most basic, indivisible part of your consciousness. So essentially, it's saying this very first split, this duality at our core, is the root of all creativity.
So that urge to create, to make things happen, it all comes back to this division within our spirit.
Exactly. And doesn't that kind of resonate with you? Like those times you feel these different forces pushing and pulling you in different directions?
Definitely. Now, page 319 talks about involution, which sounds a little negative at first glance, but it's actually not.
Not at all. The text flips the script on involution completely. It's not about decline. It's about this crucial process of your consciousness breaking down, differentiating, becoming more distinct. And that's what lets us interact with the world, or as the text puts it, the differentiated divine consciousness in all its complexity.
So kind of like a single node splitting into a chord. That makes it richer and allows for more harmony.
I love that analogy. And get this, the text actually says that this differentiation, this breaking down, isn't some kind of flaw. It's actually a divine quality, a property of the noumenal substance itself, the fundamental energy or potential behind everything. And it's even the very first step in true contemplation.
Then there's this vivid imagery of the black man and the red man within each of us. What's that all about?
That's a powerful way to picture the two key aspects of your soul. You've got the black man representing the passive soul, all about reason and logic. And then there's the red man embodying the active soul, intuition, that gut feeling, the creative spark. And the text says these two are constantly in motion within you, reflecting different parts of who you are.
It sounds a lot like that internal dialogue between your head and your heart.
Exactly. And the more varied and diverse our experiences, the stronger that contrast between our red man and black man will become. And by engaging with this interplay, we really start to get to know ourselves better. Do you ever catch yourself in those internal tug of wars between logic and intuition?
All the time. Turning to page 320, we see this phrase, free choice in the heavenly nature.
That's an interesting one. What's the text getting at here?
Well, it suggests that every part of consciousness in this heavenly nature, this higher realm of pure potential, exists right on that borderline between unity and multiplicity. So each individual consciousness is drawn to connect with the cosmic being, the ultimate source of everything. But at the same time, each one has this capacity to act independently, to exercise free will. So it's this constant balancing act between being part of something larger and being our own unique selves.
Precisely. And the text says that this tension, that constant push and pull between unity and individuality and the ability to act on our own, that's the defining principle of the heavenly nature, free choice.
Wow. That's quite a concept to wrap your head around. Okay, on pages 321 and 322, the discussion moves to the interconnectedness of reality. It seems like things aren't as separate as we might think.
That's a huge takeaway. Even those things that appear to be totally independent, even on the same level of reality, they're actually profoundly interconnected. And the text brings up isochrones to illustrate this. Think of them like lines that trace how an impulse spreads out and how its strength varies depending on the distance from its source.
Like ripples in a pond after you throw a rock in. They get weaker as they move further out.
Exactly. And these laws of harmonic combinations, they act as that fundamental link between objects and our subjective experiences of them, the cause of this interconnectedness. And here's the key point. The closer something is to that originating center, the purer and clearer its vibrations. But as you move further away, you get interference from other sources, kind of like static on a radio signal, so that original message gets distorted.
So that means how clearly we perceive something depends on how directly connected we are to its source.
Precisely. No vibration, no influence, stays perfectly consistent as it spreads out, because everything in reality is constantly interacting with a bunch of other influences. It's through a direct connection that we experience the intensity and the purity of those vibrations without that distortion. It's like, think about how rumors can change and become distorted as they pass from person to person. It's the same principle at work.
Absolutely. Now, page 323 focuses on phenomena as aspects of the noumenal. We've seen noumenal pop up a few times now. Can we dig into that a bit more?
Sure thing. The text defines noumen as the essential substance, the underlying reality in relation to the relative world, where all its attributes and phenomena, the things we see and experience, take place. So basically, phenomena are just manifestations of this noumenal substance, different ways it expresses itself in our reality.
So everything we experience in our daily lives, it's all just different expressions of this core substance.
You got it. And the text explains that every single phenomenon comes from being unified with a dynamic noumen at an a priori moment, like a foundational point before we actually experience it, and that creates a whole chain of related phenomena. So there's this direct connection, this lineage, tracing back to that noumenal source for absolutely everything we observe, every single thing.
Okay, that's pretty mind-blowing. Now, on pages 324 and 325, we come across the doctrine of Ea, or Leia centers. This feels a bit more complex.
It is a really important concept in esoteric thought. The text specifically connects Ea to Helena Blavatsky's Leia centers from the Secret Doctrine, and they're fundamental to understanding what it means to be human.
To explain this, the text uses this analogy of light passing through mirrors, right?
Right. Imagine a beam of light passing through several semi-transparent concave mirrors. Each mirror represents a different world, and that light, that's like Atman, the universal self, or spirit that's behind everything. And the images that each mirror reflects, those are the Ea of those different worlds. Each Ea, as a part or reflection of Atman, gets to know itself through its own reflection in that specific world, that specific mirror.
So Atman, that universal spirit, becomes self-aware through its individual expressions across these different realms.
You got it. Atman understands itself through its own manifestations, its own projections, in these various sections or Leia centers. It's how the one becomes aware of itself through the many. Does that analogy help visualize that connection between the universal and the individual?
It does. It's a really vivid image. Page 326 then shifts to the inner divine and the path to perfection. This sounds like it's getting into the core of spiritual growth.
It is. The text states that this unknowable Atman, this universal self, is what fuels our entire being, what drives us to live and to strive. It even talks about the highest friend within us, which it equates with God. But here's the thing. Even though this divine presence is within each of us, very few people actually truly connect with it.
And the text says that the way to connect with this inner divinity is through sacrifice, right?
Yeah, sacrificing our own personal desires and actions to the one, to that ultimate source of everything that's presented as the path to perfection. And it suggests that true happiness, joy, and that feeling of inner light, they're signs that we've achieved union with this inner God. And that, in turn, leads to freedom from those cycles of birth, death, aging, and suffering, and gives us access to the water of immortality.
Wow, that's quite a promise, and it sounds like a pretty challenging path. Then page 327 brings in this idea of the heart as the root of being and the law of atrophy. How do these connect?
Well, the text quotes the Rig Veda saying, "Wise men found the roots of being in their heart." So it's saying that our very core, our truest self, is deeply linked to our heart, that inner center. And it goes on to say that everything, every element of reality, is actually a reflection of spirit expressed in the unique form and vibration of its specific world.
And this law of atrophy governs our abilities to perceive and interact with the world around us.
That's right. This law says that we develop new abilities for communication and perception when we need them to understand and interact with the world. But when we don't need those abilities anymore, or if we can't actually use them, they kind of fade away. They go from being actively expressed to becoming just potential. It's this really interesting concept of our capacities evolving and adapting to what we need to engage with reality. Think about those senses we may not use as much now in our modern world compared to our ancestors. That's a form of this law in action.
So it's not that our senses are fixed, but they actually respond to what we need to survive and thrive.
That's a fascinating take. Finally, page 328 brings us back to the intertwined paths of intuition and reason, and those two figures. the red man and the black man.
Yes, it comes back to those two fundamental aspects of our soul. Intuition, which is the red man, and reason, the black man. And they're not meant to be separate. They're inherently linked, each with its own way of understanding and knowing. Intuition, that's about fire, feeling, seeing the big picture, knowledge that feels like it's coming from above. Then you have reason, which is all about analysis, breaking things down, categorizing information, knowledge we build through logic.
But they're not supposed to be at odds with each other, are they? Definitely not. The text emphasizes that both intuition and reason are absolutely essential for us to move forward, to grow as individuals. They're intertwined, leading us towards a unification of these seemingly opposing forces. Heaven and earth, the huge and the tiny, the higher and the lower, the external and internal, ultimately guiding us toward eternal knowledge and truth. It's the harmony of these two fundamental ways of understanding that drives our journey.
So looking back at pages 318 through 328 of ASSF, what are the most important things we've learned?
Well, the biggest takeaways are definitely about that dynamic interplay between our individual will and this much grander cosmic picture, that drive to act and create. It comes from this inherent duality within us that then breaks down, allowing us to engage with the world. And even though the world seems fragmented, it's actually deeply interconnected, governed by these principles of harmony and the flow of that underlying numinal substance. And our inner divine self, connected to that universal Atman, that's the source of all our power and our potential for perfection. That journey involves recognizing the wisdom that's within our own hearts and understanding that our abilities are constantly adapting. And ultimately, true progress comes from acknowledging and integrating both our intuition and our reason, those two distinct yet inseparable paths.
It's amazing how much these pages cover, really showing us that our individual experience is both totally unique and part of this incredible cosmic dance. So for you listening, think about this. You've got this inherent duality within you, and your consciousness is constantly in motion. How could you consciously navigate that interplay between your intuitive red side and your reasoning black side? Could that lead you to a more meaningful experience of reality? That's definitely something worth pondering.
Absolutely. And remember, this deep dive into these pages of Oisish just scratches the surface of a vast and profound understanding. We can't wait to continue exploring these ideas and connections in our future deep dives.